Again, welcome. My name is Jesse Singleton. I am the Assistant Director for Student Support with UTEP's Graduate School, and I'm excited to talk with you all about job searching and the STAR interviewing method today. What I will start with, though, is a bit of a caveat as we think about interviewing and we think about job searching. You all are likely coming from very highly specialized professions and academic disciplines, and so the information I'm going to give you for you today is more generalized information that I believe will be applicable, but it's always good to also investigate what are the common norms for your specific discipline. And so you want to take the things that we talk about today and consider how they work in your specific field, if there are any differences there, as there can be some differentiation. But we'll go through today some really good generalized information that most folks can apply as we go through. I also want to give a quick announcement and reminder. If you haven't already, please consider taking the Graduate Student Satisfaction Survey. We have sent out a couple of notices about that. You may have seen it on our social media, and it has come to your email with the program survey 2023 and Your Voice Matters tag. I strongly encourage folks to take that survey. It is really helpful for us to identify not only what's going great with your programs, but areas of improvement that we then go back to your program and chat with them and help make improvements over the course of the year and multiple years. And so we need good data. We need your perspective on that. And so we strongly ask you to fill that out. And also encourage you to have your peers complete that. If you have constructive feedback to give, please give it. It really helps us in the graduate school and also your programs. And so please consider taking that survey for us. It's right now scheduled to close on March 31st. There is an incentive for completing it. There's a $50 gift card drawing. So please consider that. As far as today's agenda and what we're hoping to talk about, and so I'm going to start first in the job search area and talking about how you can prepare for your search so that you can be successful, the different ways that you can go about that, and good advice for preparing for a search. We'll have a little bit of dialogue on how you can target your search. So what job market are you really looking for, and how that might be different, have different requirements and timelines and areas to search. We'll talk about the process of managing a job search, which can be a pretty daunting task if you haven't done it in the past. And then we'll talk about very briefly the steps in the screening and hiring process, if you've not gone through a hiring process before, to know what to expect. And then we'll move into the actual interviewing piece. There's a couple different types of interview questions we'll talk about. We'll get some practice specifically with the STAR interview method. And when we get to that section, really encourage participation from the online group to chat with us a bit today. We are technically in person and virtual, although it seems that our in-person folks have not found our new room. If you don't know, we're in a new space today. We're starting in Business 304. Typically, our sessions have been over in the library. We outgrew that space, although it seems like folks have had trouble finding us. So I'm mostly working with y'all in the virtual space today. Happy to do that. So if you have questions, put them in the chat. But as we get to the participative pieces, feel free to either post messages or when we get to the actual question answer, come off mute and take a stab at addressing a question. It'd be really helpful, and for me in the session and for you in your practice. All right, so that's our agenda. First thing we're talking about is preparing for that job search and how you're setting the table for success. It's not something you want to just dive into without having the necessary steps taken to ensure your best possible outcome. And so you need to think in advance how you set the table, right? And so that starts with making sure you are getting all your documents in line and everything is prepped and ready for when you start your job search. You want to make sure that your resume or your CV is up to date, that you have some working documents for cover letters. You don't want to recycle cover letters, but you want to have some working framework for when you apply. And you want to make sure that you have your references all in line. I recommend having at least 5 references on tap. You may have a job application that requires 3. You may have some that requires 5. It may require a mix of references, and so you want to have a couple different options if you need 3. And so you want to make sure that you have those on file, the actual contact information for those references, and that they are willing to serve as a reference for you. What you don't want to do in a reference situation is kind of just put someone's name down, and then they get a call out of the blue from a potential employer and start asking questions, and this person hadn't agreed to be your reference. It's going to catch them off guard. They may not represent you well, and they may be kind of offended by that. So you always want to make sure you talk to your references in advance, let them know you're starting a job search and to expect some phone calls, and make sure you ask, like, are you willing to serve as a positive reference for me? That way you get really strong references and can speak to your ability. Working back on our list here, you want to make sure you have those cover letters ready so that when a great opportunity pops up, you can draw on some previous verbiage. And so you're not recreating the wheel each time, but you're also tailoring it to the job you're applying for. And you want to make sure you're updating your resume or your CV consistently, at least on a yearly basis, so that you aren't losing track of some of the great things that you're doing as you're working through your graduate programs, and maybe you have some professional roles that you're also serving in, or you have some paraprofessional roles. You want to capture all that hard work so that it sells you well on the resume. And it can be very easy to forget about a few committees you were on or a major task you completed if you only update your resume as you start a job search, because then you're trying to go through maybe 3 or 4 years of accomplishments at one time. And so I strongly recommend a yearly update. And as you work on something major, just going and updating your resume. When you get all these documents ready in advance and you're consistently kind of reviewing them, even if you're not in the active job search mode, what that allows you to do is if you see a job open up that you're excited about, you have the ability to quickly move and submit an application. Sometimes jobs will have a very long application window and a long hiring process, and we'll talk about some of those timelines. Sometimes it'll be a very narrow time window, or you'll find out about the job as the job is coming towards the close of their application window. And so it can be really stressful and really disappointing if you find out about a job opportunity that just kind of somehow falls into your area of awareness, and it's closing tomorrow, and your resume hasn't been updated. You don't have any good working documents you can draft up a cover letter for, and you haven't notified your references, so you don't have the references. And so it might be the perfect job, but you don't have enough time to submit your application. So working in advance and getting everything ready early will allow you to, one, strike when a job does become available and you see a great opportunity, but two, it'll make the whole process easier when you start applying for multiple jobs, depending on the scope of your search. You also want to consider those timelines. Again, you might have something that pops up where it's like, there's only a day left before this application closes, right? But you might have things where there's a very long time window, or a job appears to have been sitting open for a very long time period. There's a lot of reasons for that. In general, if you're looking at an academic search, those potentially can last 6 to 9 months for an academic position. Not always, it depends on the type of position and what they're hiring for. But often if they're looking at, faculty roles and academic level, academic roles, they're looking for future years, right? It's not an immediate vacancy. And so there's more time for them to mull through the applicants and find the right person. And then even when they hire, that start date might not be until the subsequent semester. And so you may be offered a position in spring that doesn't start till fall, right? And so the academic searches can have longer timelines, although that's not always the case. If you're looking at higher education positions that are outside the immediate academic area, and so you're looking at administrative level roles and things like that, those can be a 2 to 3 month window, and that's fairly common. I would say it's not common for them to be shorter than the 2 to 3 month window from start of application to the hire, because there is a lot of process that goes into hiring someone in higher education. And so you have a lot of background checks, searching, and the screen process has to go through HR, and there's a lot of checks that has to run, getting someone into the system. It takes a lot of time. And so typically from the time they post to the time someone starts, the earliest on a rush may be a month, but often it's 2 to 3 months. And typically that's also a negotiated start time of, you've went through the entire process for the past month and a half, and you still need a month to finish up your other job tasks, right? And so higher education administrative roles, 2 to 3 months. If you're looking at industry, that may move quicker, but it may not. It really depends on the specific industry you're in and the specific company that's doing the hiring. They may have a lot of flexibility in the HR process, and it might be a high need, and they may be looking to hire someone in very quickly. And so they may move very quickly through application phase, have a high volume, screen very tough, only interview a select number of people, and then make their offer and bring them right in. Industry has the ability to do some of those things, but that isn't always the case. They also may move at a very deliberate pace, depending on the company. As you're preparing, you have your documents, you're starting to collect those. You kind of have an idea of your time windows, depending on the job you want to apply for, so you know when to start searching. You also want to ask yourself some reflective questions to help frame what you're searching for. You don't want to have not done this soul searching and have a target in mind. And so the first recommendation I would say is really sit down and think about, where do you want to work and where are you willing to work? And by that, I mean location. It's important to think about, I'm willing to work within the West Texas region, but I want to work in Colorado, right? If that's where you're at. I personally have moved around a lot in my profession. I've worked in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I've worked in Honolulu, Hawaii. I've worked here in El Paso, Texas. I've been very willing to move around in my work to get different experiences and to see different things. That's something that excites me. There are other folks that would not be as excited about the prospect of moving in very large geographical regions. And so maybe they are looking at very specific regions. I want to work in the American Southwest. I want to work specifically on the East Coast. But think about what's your ideal location, and then where are you willing to work, or where are you not willing to work? One of the areas that I had looked at and was not willing to put in an application was in Alaska. I have friends that have worked in Alaska. It's beautiful up there. There's amazing culture. I am not a fan of the cold weather. And at the end of the day, I just knew I wouldn't be happy working in an environment that had those temperatures. There's a reason I left Milwaukee. So I had to know what my limits were. And I encourage you to do the same. But think about personally, you have to work there and live there. So where are you wanting to work? Where are you willing to work? Think about what salary is tolerable and what is achievable, right? As you're moving into first positions, you may have a salary goal that may not line up with what is entry level in your profession. And so then there might be wide ranges in what is offered depending on region or company. So deciding what is something that is tolerable for you, what can I accept? And that isn't setting like the bottom dollar, I'll work for nothing. But is there a certain amount? It's like, I need to be making over X amount of dollars to feel like the degree that I have achieved is paying what it should, and that I can have the lifestyle that I'm looking for. I feel like I'm valued in what I do. So figure out what that is, and it's going to do some budgeting around that, and think also regionally on that, because that salary of what's tolerable in New York is going to be very different than what that salary is in Mississippi, right? Two very different socioeconomic environments, and so the pay rate is going to be different there. And so thinking about where you're at in region and what the pay rate would need to be, and there's some good online calculators you can look at that'll help compare those. But then also what's achievable. And so thinking about, this is what I would be willing to accept a position for, but this is also what I know within that field I may be able to get. And then that'll help frame the jobs you apply for as you're screening and thinking about, I want to apply for this job versus I don't want to apply for that job. Think about what's the most important to you in a workplace. Is it the culture of the workplace? Is it the pay you receive? And for some folks, that'll be it. Like, I'm making a really good pay. I don't care what the work office culture is like. I'm going to go in, I'm going to do my work, I'm going to go home. Some folks, they're willing to accept a little bit lower pay if they're enjoying the people they work with, right? Is it that their work is interesting to you, right? If you're moving through and getting an advanced degree, I would hope part of your desire to pursue this advanced education is that you find the work interesting. And that'll be something that's important for you, is that I got to value what I do. Is it that there's potential for advancement? So you find a company where you know you're coming in a bit lower in the entry level than you would hope, but you know if you're talking to recruiters or looking at the organizational structure, there's an opportunity for advancement. So you know that coming in at that entry level may lead within a year or two to moving more quickly through the company. And so you're hoping to work there for a long period of time. Also looking at, is it something that is a public benefit, overall? And so that's something that is something to consider. A lot of folks that go into nonprofit or even higher education, they look less at the pay and more about what I do benefits society in some way, right? I know that's something that, and I look at my own professional searches, I look at organizations, I look at institutions that I believe are benefiting the community around them. And I recognize that I could make a little more working in industry, but I feel like I'm positively impacting people by working in a university setting. So is that something that's important to you? And how does that stack up against other factors? So you'll need to think about that, because again, you have a lot of opportunities that you may apply for, and you'll need to kind of in your mind think about, where do I want to focus my time? Because that will focus on potentially where you do your search. And then think about, what are you currently doing that enables your success in your search? And so you have to think, I'm going to be applying in 6 months. I'm going to be applying in 9 months. I'm applying a year from now. I'm applying 2 years from now. What are you doing right now that will help you get the job, right? And so that may be professional development activities. You're here right now attending one, so that's a great step. How often are you engaging with that? And are you working on specific skills to your program, or are you also developing soft skills that allow you to function within the job, right? How are you being able to sell both of those things in an interview? So what development activities are you taking part in? What mentorship are you receiving? And are you putting effort into that mentorship relationship? So seeking out mentors, both maybe your assigned mentor and developing that relationship. And if you want more information on how to work through that, our individualized development plan workshop talks heavily about cultivating your relationship with your mentor, but also seeking outside mentorship, right? The mentor you choose that may be a professional mentor. How are you seeking that out, which also helps you network and may lead you to other job opportunities? What student orgs are you participating in, if any, knowing that those are resume builders. And so even if you are kind of sitting in the session today saying, Jesse, I'm really not interested in being the president of a student org, I'm here to get my doctoral degree and move through my process, will participation in being the vice president of a student org enable you to get a job? And is that something you're like, you know what, I'm willing to put the time in on that, and maybe you'll enjoy it too. But if it's not a student organization, what else are you doing that is a resume builder throughout your time in your collegiate program? Because unless you're working as a working professional and studying right now, you do have that. You need to be working on the soft skill set, the resume builders that show you were active in your profession and your skill sets during your time here. So think about what that tangibly is. And again, if you have questions, if I'm going too fast on anything, please feel free to pop those in the chat. I'm going to try and keep my best eye on that as we go through today. Next, so you've got your prep, you've done your reflective questions. You have to figure out, what job market are you targeting? And there are several that you may look at. There's kind of 4 main ones that may be open to you. There is looking at the realm of academia. That's a faculty, a lecturer, researchers, all working in those academic tracks. And we talked about in the 6 to 9 month hiring window, pretty common in those areas. It's a very popular track for folks that are in graduate education, is to be looking at, I want to once a day be a faculty member. There is a reality that we have to face that goes along with the idea of, I'm going to be a faculty member, that there is a bottleneck in a lot of academic programs where there are more PhDs produced, or doctoral degrees produced, than there are faculty positions that are available. And so if you are looking at that track, how do you set yourself apart from your peers who may also be looking to become faculty? And that may also require that you're looking at a broader search for location to find a position that is open for you. Whereas if you're looking at some of the other areas, there may be more opportunity, right? And so if you're like, I'm dead set, I'm staying in El Paso, I'm born and raised in El Paso, I got my doctoral degree here, and I want to be on the faculty, your options become very narrow at that point. And so you have to think about, how does you set yourself apart to be successful there, or what other concessions are you willing to make? You can also look at higher education administration. And so if you're wanting to move into academia, but you know that faculty positions may be difficult to come by, or you're just interested in the operation of an institution, there is higher education administration. And so that's the staff that you interact with on a regular basis, the deans, the executive leadership. And so sometimes you'll have folks that will work in a classroom as a faculty member, as a lecturer, or as a researcher, that then move into administration later on. And sometimes you have folks that move directly into administration after a program. I myself work through a master's program and I'm in administration. And so that's what I do. And so there's definitely a path for that. You can also look at industry. And so that's companies and nonprofits and folks in your sector. And so it's moving outside of the realm of academia and higher education, but still working on, the things that are highly related to your field. And then the last would be looking at government, which would be local, state, federal levels, and a variety of agencies. Again, another potential avenue that folks will explore. So when you think about this, you're trying to think of opportunities to determine what you're wanting to do. The reflective questions can help you do that. But also looking at the different jobs you may find in your earliest preliminary searches. You want to do this early in your programs, seeing what postings are available, reading through and seeing, does that job description excite me? Do I want to do that? And then finding from there what industry they're fitting in, and that can help frame your search. You want to think about, is there an area you want to focus, and areas that you are also interested in, but not your primary area? And is there a moral or ethical imperative or a personal passion that's going to dictate what industry you go or what area you go into? You don't have to just focus on one, right? It's not just faculty or nothing, academia, that's it. I actually don't recommend looking at those areas, looking at the 4 areas and only pursuing one branch, because that's a fast track to being frustrated in your search, or maybe not leading to a positive search in your first year or right after your graduation. And you may end up having an intermediate time where you're not employed or you're underemployed outside your field because you're hyper-focused on one very specific area, and it may have been a very narrow area. So looking at, I want to be a faculty member, or I want to work in the government area, because I see those things as very related, right? You might find that is your sweet spot. So you're looking at both of those, because you want to be either a researcher at an R1 institution, or you want to be a researcher at a government lab, right? You may look at it and say, I'm not interested in industry unless it's a nonprofit, because I'm frustrated by how for-profit industries have treated things, science in my profession, and so I'm only looking at nonprofits. Or you may look at that in the flip side and say, there's not enough resource in the nonprofit sector to do what I want to do, and I feel I'll have a better impact on society if I move into the industry area where there's better funding potentially, right? It really depends on your field. It depends on you as a person, and there isn't any right or wrong answer on all of this. It's you as a person, you as what your overall career goals are. But I strongly encourage you to not just be in one area, pick maybe your focus, and then start looking in the other areas for things that, again, you find interesting, that may be an alternative opportunity. Because you also just don't know what might pop up that may be really exciting to you. And you don't want to cut yourself off from an opportunity that you never searched for because you kind of assumed automatically industry just wasn't for you, right? And so find what that is. So we went through the process of figuring out where we're going to go, and we're now gearing up. We're actually going to start our job search, right? And that can be a huge task depending on the scope of the search you're going to conduct and what else is going on in your life, right? If you are conducting this search while finishing out your doctoral degree or a master's degree, that's a lot to balance. And so you want to make sure that you have all the organization pieces in place so you can do it effectively and not lose out on opportunities. Because at a certain point, you have to almost treat the search as your second job, right? If you want to really find all the opportunities and find the applications you're looking for. And so starting by figuring out for your specific profession, where are the jobs posted, right? That may be predominantly looking at Indeed, right? Or there may be very specific posting sites for your profession. I know for me, working in higher education administration, if I wanted to look for positions, I primarily start at higheredjobs.com, and then I would look at the NASPA website, I would look at a Kuwai, I would look at those type of job boards, and I know that I can find most postings somewhere in there. And so that's where I start. But I also know that not every institution posts on those websites because it does cost money to post on those websites. So if I have specific institutions I'm interested in, I can set up job alerts for those institutions so I'll get notices when something posts that's in my field, right? I know how my profession tends to work. It's important for you to also figure out for your profession what exactly or where is the confluence of job postings going to pop up and what's the trend. Think about professional organizations within your field and where they may post jobs. As I mentioned, NASPA and Kuwai, those are both student affairs professional organizations that do a lot of job search related work for the profession. And so I know those are avenues for me to find positions. And then look at your professional network and maybe where you get referrals, right? In my current role here well, not in my current role, but in my time at UTEP, because I've changed positions once while at UTEP, I was referred to this institution by a colleague that I worked for in a different institution, and he had ended up at UTEP. And he called me and said, hey, you should look at this job posting. And initially, I had found the job posting on insiderhighered.com and went to go investigate it, and it didn't appear on the HR website because the HR website had an issue, right? And so if I hadn't received that secondary call, I wouldn't have went back to it. It was part of my look through and my search. It didn't appear on the website. I assumed the job search was closed. So that network and that referral allowed me to find the job posting, because I reached out to HR and they said, oh, yep, that's an error. We have to repost it. I applied for a job. I interviewed through the position. I ended up at the institution off of this referral. And so, don't sell your network short, and that you may have something that just pops up that could be really helpful for you. So you kind of know where you may find your job opportunities. I strongly recommend creating a mechanism for actually tracking what you apply for. And I use Excel for this. So if you have something where another system you use for tracking, that's okay. But do something that tracks the jobs you're applying for, or at least the opportunities that you're finding, right? And so when I create this, I always include the job title, because there's differentiation in the jobs that we're searching for. The job ID, because usually I'm looking at university websites and they'll include an ID number, so that's easy for me to quick search and find it, because they don't always show up well with a title search. I indicate the location the position is located, so I can kind of get an idea of where I'd be working. If there's a pay range listed, I make sure to indicate that. If there isn't a pay range listed, I will do my best to try and look around on the university website, the human resources area, and even on my Glassdoor, and try to find, is there something that'll tell me what the pay range for this job title is? You can usually find something, right? To give you an idea, because if they list commensurate with experience, okay, well, what does a director at that institution make? I can find a range usually somewhere on the HR website. If there are key benefits that you find exciting about the position, right? Whether that is tangible benefits like health insurance, or an intangible benefit like opportunity for advancement, indicate those in a short column so you know why you're excited about that job. Indicate the posting date. So when did they put the job up, right? If you find the job and it's been up for 2 weeks, indicate that. If it gives a close date, make sure you indicate that as well, so you can make sure as you're going through and doing your research and finding your job postings, you know what you need to apply for first, so you can not miss any opportunities. But also recognizing if something has been open and you find a great job and it's been open for 4 months, are they still actively screening the applications? Is there something else happening in that job search? You can always put in an application, but it gives you more context, right? Or if it's been open for 2 weeks, you put in an application and it takes a long time to hear back. As we go through kind of like the talk about the life cycle of a job posting, they may have received in that first week 50 applications, started their initial screen, and every application that comes in after that is in their secondary pool they will only go back to if they don't find someone in the first 50. They're not obligated to tell you that. They're not obligated to close the application window. So it's important to find the jobs early, apply early. But no, okay, I found this one 2 weeks late. I applied the day I found it. And I haven't heard back, right? You can get some idea of why that may be. That's why also, again, I always include the date that I applied, so I know when where I'm at in the process. And then if I feel like I need to follow up, I know how long it's been since I've communicated with them. And then I always keep notes on any responses I receive. If that is an interview offer, secondary interview offers, or anything in the process there, or if it's the polite decline, I indicate that. And if they tell me why, I will also indicate that. Now, it's not common for folks to tell you why they declined to move forward in the process. Usually it's, we were given a great candidate pool, and while you had exceptional talents, you're just not what we're looking for, right? Very common verbiage. But if they tell you something, I've had some where I was able to talk to a recruiter and found out, you're a great candidate, but you have less experience than the rest of the pool. So you meet the minimums and the preferreds, but the applicant pool still has 5 years more experience than you on average. Okay, well, there's not much I can do about that, right? But I note that, so I have some idea for that institution and the job that you work on, right? And so if you have this running list, you can be much more organized in the search that you're doing. Depending on the scope of your search and if this is your first search, you may have a lot of entries and you may have less. I can tell you from my personal experience, when I did my very first search, out of my bachelor's, looking at my first position, I applied for over 100 jobs. I got a lot of interviews. I had to whittle it down. I was definitely trying to break into a market that was saturated, but I applied for over 100 jobs. As I moved from my first professional position and then working for 5 or 6 years in the profession and moved towards my secondary, I did a national search and I applied for about 40 to 50 jobs. I applied for those because I wanted to see what was out there, not because I needed to submit that many applications, to be really honest, but I was willing to look very broadly and talk to a lot of different organizations to see what was a good fit. As I moved into what I describe as a mid-level type position where I'm at now, I applied for maybe 10 jobs to find and break through to that next level. And again, that was all about screening out where do I want to go versus that first job, which was who's going to take me because I needed a position out of my bachelor's degree, right? And so as you're thinking about organizing a search, if you know you're going to be applying for a volume of jobs, you need to have a way to track that and know where you're at in the process. Because if you do move deep into a process, you also want to be able to notify the other folks you get offered. You want to be the person that notifies and say, please remove me from your candidate pool, right? That's the polite thing to do. And so knowing where you're at is important. So overall steps that you're going to see in general in a hiring process, and again, this isn't the way everyone goes, but it's fairly common. There is going to be a period of application collection, depending on the position that they're hired for and the urgency. Again, as I talked about, you may have positions where it's open for a week. They get their first initial run of applications. They get a very large volume of it, and then they start screening, and then everyone after that goes into another pool. You may have situations where HR requires them to review every single application and consider it. You may have situations where they open it for literally 5 days and then it closes because it hits a cap and a quota. But there's always some period of application collection, right? And depending on when you see it posted, we'll give you some information about where they're at in their process. As they go through their application collection, they move into what is the initial screen. That may happen once they close the application. That may be ongoing, depending on their process. After they complete their initial screen to determine if folks have the minimum qualifications and if they have the preferred qualifications, because if you have enough folks that meet both, you can politely decline the folks that are minimums, but not maybe meeting your preferreds. Because if you receive, let's say 50 applications and 20 of those are meeting all of your preferred qualifications, that interview team may not have time to interview 50 people. They may only have time to interview those 20. And so they may release the other folks that aren't meeting their preferreds, right? They're spoiled for choice. They can do that. So they'll be doing some kind of screen process to determine who moves through to the interview. And so then they do the interviews. It's very common for a first interview to be either by phone or by Zoom or in some method, not usually an in-person one. Sometimes they will then move to a secondary interview or a third round of interviews, depending on their process. And that's that finalist interview phase that may be on site. It may not. It really depends on the organization. And if they have the means to fly you out somewhere or bring you on site, or if you're local. Typically, they'll try to be consistent. And so if they're not bringing, someone from across the country on site, but you're local, they probably won't bring you on site either, because then there's some unfair advantage there. Again, not always consistent, but typically folks will try to do that. And again, depending on the organization, you may have one interview, 2 interviews, or several. I can tell you in my search process where I was hired at the University of Hawaii, I interviewed once on the phone, twice at a job conference, another interview on the phone, and then I was offered a campus interview. And that campus interview lasted for 2.5 days. And so very extensive process. And they brought people to campus for that final phase. So you understand why they're going through 4 interviews before they even extend to their finalists, because there's a heavy time investment and a heavy cost for them to bring folks to their institution for an on-site visit. And so you may see additional layers on that, but you may have situations where you have a 30-minute interview and that's it. And then you get a phone call that is moving to the offer phase, right? I've also experienced this where I had one 30-minute interview, was with the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, 30-minute interview. It went fine, but I thought that was it. And then a month later, I got a phone call offering me the position. I had already accepted a job elsewhere. It was kind of surprising because I just finished through that process of accepting another job. So that can also happen. But they will, if you're the successful candidate, they'll move through that offer phase. which then gives you the space to negotiate. And I strongly encourage you to, also look into the process of negotiation and develop some comfortability with that. There's typically a space to be able to negotiate, but it's not where most of us feel most comfortable, right? And so be prepared for that. It can be very challenging and a lot of stress to get the offer and then feel like you can negotiate, right? A lot of times we're just elated that somebody wants us, and so we'll take whatever. But it's important to think about knowing your worth, knowing what is the worth of the field, and what you are wanting to negotiate for. And so I encourage you to seek out some additional professional development on that. And then if you go through the offer, you accept that offer and negotiate, then they move to the onboarding phase. That's actually bringing you in and getting you through into their system and getting you working, right? And so that's the entire process, start to finish, of what hiring looks like, right? Not rocket science, but if no one's ever laid it out for you, you've never experienced it, there can be some hidden pieces you may not be aware of. But in all this, I want you to remember, as we've talked about the whole process of doing the job search, is that an effective job search only finds you a lead, right? All those things I talked about, helping you find the right opportunity, it just gets you the lead for a job. It doesn't get you the job, right? Crafting that amazing resume or that amazing CV that only gets you in the room, whether that's on the phone in the room or physically in the room with the interviewer, right? It only gets you the interview. The resume and the CV does not get you the job, right? The piece of this that we have to spend time on and think about is the interview, and how you respond in that situation is what actually gets you the job. And so you have to have all the pieces to get you that lead, to then get you the interview, but then you have to perform when you get in the room, right? And so how can we help you prepare for that? And again, if you have questions about any of this, drop them in the chat, go off mute, let me know. But what we're going to talk about now is the different types of interview questions you may face, and some different tips on how to approach them. And then we're going to spend some specific time on the most complicated interview questions to answer. And that's at the end of the presentation. And then we'll get a little bit of time for practice. So the first one is the traditional interview question. This one is really deceptive, folks, believe me, because it seems like the simplest, but they can be the ones that throw you for the loop as you just start an interview, when you're at your most high stress, you haven't gotten comfortable in the interview space yet. And that is the traditional question. It focuses on you, your personality, work ethic, right? It's the very traditional, like, hey, welcome to the interview. Tell us about yourself. And when you get asked that, it seems so broad. And it seems like, well, I can talk about myself. But in the interview space, that can be really jarring, right? And so you want to think about in advance, what do I want to tell them about myself? What do they need to know, right? And it's not just a free-for-all. You want to keep it germane to the work that you do, but also help them understand you, right? But think about that, right? If you haven't ever sat down and practiced in a mirror with someone telling about yourself in an interview context, make sure you do that. Other examples may be like, what's your greatest strength and your greatest weakness, right? And how are you going to craft that question or that response? So the tips when you have that traditional interview question is to be honest and forthright, but avoid oversharing, right? Tell us about yourself isn't an invitation to share everything you would with your therapist, right? It's not a space to bash on your previous place of employment, right? It's a space to talk about you, what motivates you, why you're in your profession, maybe a snippet of your personal story of how you got to where you are and why you're interested in the field. Maybe you can throw in some tidbits about what else you like to do. Saying, yeah, I am in this profession because X, Y, Z. And then outside of the workplace, I enjoy hiking, a couple of hobbies, things like that. Give that well-rounded answer of who you are, but you want to keep this relatively brief because typically this tell you about yourself question isn't really scored, right, in any way. It's to get you talking, right? And so if you have a 30-minute interview and you spend 10 minutes on tell me about yourself, you've lost a lot of time for the more important questions. So think about what's a concise way you can put that across. Find ways to relate the response back to the opportunity or the company on what you're doing. Again, think about what is your personal story and how you get there. And remember, you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you, right? And I think this is really good tips for not just the traditional interview question, but the entire interview process. If you can get it into your brain as you approach the interview that I'm interviewing them as much as they're interviewing me. I'm wanting to know about how they conduct their business, how they approach and talk to me in the interview, because I want to know if I want to work there, because I have value, I have worth, I am a commodity, and they want to hire me. And so if you approach it from that mindset of you also bring things to the table, it improves your confidence overall in the interview. And it also, you have stronger responses, but it takes a little bit of the weight off of feeling like you're on the hot seat, right? Put them on the hot seat too, because you want to evaluate that. Is it going to be a place you want to work? The next are the technical questions. And again, you typically see a lot of these on an interview, usually one or two if it's required. But there's something that really focuses on problem solving or technical knowledge for a specific position, right? And so that is like, what is your understanding of XYZ? What is the proper procedure for blank, right? The example I will use for this, where I saw this used in a screening process that always sticks out in my brain, is actually here at UTEP. They were interviewing for the aquatics director position, and they had several candidates. Some of them had some aquatics level, experience. Some folks had experience in rec sports, but not in aquatics directly. Some folks had aquatic experience, but not in a university setting. And one of the questions they asked was, what's the proper pH for a Olympic-sized swimming pool? Right? It's a technical question. There was one answer for it. And 90% of the folks that interviewed did not provide the answer that the interviewer was looking for. Gave an improper response, fumbled around. It was a technical question to say, can you manage the technical side of this job because you're in charge of our aquatics program, right? And so there may be questions like that that'll appear in your interviews, depending specifically on your field as well. The way to handle the technical questions is make sure you do your research in advance, know what's in the job description, right? And if you're going for an aquatics director, like, is there technical knowledge you need to know? Always avoid fluffing an answer and don't bluff, right? And so if it's a simple technical question, don't spend 5 to 10 minutes answering it. Give them the answer. If you don't know the answer, that's okay, right? Articulate that you're unfamiliar, but also that you are trainable and that you have a related skill set, right? And so if, using the example of the aquatics director, if you had only been in smaller environments, it's like, well, I'm not actually familiar with the pH for a Olympic-sized swimming pool in an indoor capacity, but working in the Parks and Recreation Department for the county, our outdoor pools require this pH level, right? Or indicating, I don't have direct experience working in aquatics. However, I have experience working in these other technical areas and learned these skills. And I'm sure within a short period of time, I can apply those skills to learning about the aquatics position. And so I may not have that specific technical knowledge. I am very intelligent. I'm able to train and learn those things and be the best employee for you, right? And so if you don't know a technical question, don't make it up, but do train it back towards your strengths. And then for this one, always remember, you can't really talk your way into a job, right? We talk about the interview process and giving good answers, right? But you're not really talking your way into the job. You either have the responses and the knowledge and the skill set and the fit, right? You can't really talk your way into it, but you can definitely talk yourself out of a job, right? And that's if you get those technical questions and you start kind of floundering, you elongate the answer, you make something up, right? And I saw folks, and again, that aquatics example, kind of meander around and eventually just kind of throw out a number, and they've talked themselves out of that position. Their interview was going really well, and it kind of stopped dead right there because they showed they didn't have the technical knowledge, and they weren't also willing to own up to that, right? And so for anything that you're doing, be mindful of that you can always talk yourself out of by oversharing or giving incorrect information. All right, so the last one, and the one where we'll also get into some of the examples, and I'll ask you all to participate a bit. We're doing okay on time. We got about 12 minutes left. Is the behavioral questions, right? These are some of the more difficult ones to answer. They focus on evaluating past performance to predict your future performance, right? And so that's like questions about, tell us about a time you took a project from start to finish. What did you learn from the experience, right? They're trying to get a gauge of what you've done in the past and then how that's going to work in their environment, right? Does it line up with what they're looking for? And so for that, we recommend applying the STAR method. Like a lot of things, it's an acronym, right? So when you think about these behavioral questions, you want to start by describing the situation, right? With any relevant but succinct details. Now, it's important when you think about STAR answers, they can go on for a long time. If you got 20 interview questions to answer in 30 minutes, not every question can be 5 minutes long, right? So succinct, relevant details. Talk about the situation, then give the task at hand, right? Articulate the strategy or approach that you were going to implement. Talk about the action you specifically took, how you contributed to developing something, and then what was the result, whether that's a positive or something you learned from it. Don't underestimate the value of talking about how you learned from something that didn't go as well as you planned, right? And so showing that vulnerability, that honesty, but that ability to learn and grow. And so if you look at a project from start to finish and what you learn from the experience, quick example, that I would give is working on the Graduate Expo or Grad Expo for UTEP, something I was new at. It is a conference-like experience that has students presenting their research. In order to put that conference-like full-day experience on, it required recruiting a committee of both within my department and external to my department, recruiting student participants, managing a lot of administrative tasks leading up to, and then on the day of, and then successfully managing the entire process during the day as people were presenting. So to do that effectively, I recruited a good team that I then delegated well to and empowered them to be successful throughout the interview, the planning process, and then gave very specific guidelines on the day of where they needed to be and how they were approaching their tasks. I was present throughout the entire process, kind of acting as an upper level administrator, jumping in to help if there was an overflow, but also giving them the autonomy to manage their stations. And the end result is that we have continued to increase our number of participants in Grad Expo from year to year, and it got really positive feedback on how students participate and the growth and development they get from that, right? There's my STAR interview in a really, really quick example of project start to finish, right? But there's more things that we can go with this, and this is where I'll give a couple more examples, right? So examples of a behavioral question and where the STAR method applies. So give an example of a difficult problem you solved at work and how do you go about reaching a solution, right? And so a situation in this I would use is we had a situation where we had to adjust the resident assistant duty rotation at the housing department at the University of Hawaii at Manoa due to changing federal regulations on overtime work. And the duty rotation is an after hours overnight thing. And they were having too much work hours associated with it. And so for that, I had to kind of develop a very specific duty rotation that moved from RAs being only in their buildings in duty pairs to a duty pool that oversaw sections of our campus. And so I developed and wrote that plan, and then I pitched that to our department and my colleagues to generate buy-in for that plan and train them what it would look like. And then we implemented that for RAs in a coming semester. The end result was that they had fewer duty days overall. They actually were able to do rounds with 4 people as opposed to 2, and it maintained the same level of security and safety for our residents. And it also met the federal guidelines. So it was able to make it a win-win-win for everybody in the situation, and overall was a net gain, right? So difficult problem, found a solution, use the STAR method to describe that task in a relatively short amount of time. So there's 3 examples. Well, now I'd like to invite anyone that wants to come off mute and let me know who wants to take a shot at an interview question. And go ahead and volunteer, and then I'll change the slide and bring up the interview question so you have a fresh take at it. Awesome. Well, folks, as I recognize it is 3:59, and so we have ran up right to our time. As we go through, I did record this session, and so if you want to refer back to it, I will post this hopefully by the end of the week. So you can see some of it. The example questions are good to review as well. So if we went through and you had me talk about some of these either traditional or technical or the behavioral questions that fit the STAR method, these are all questions I pulled from major job applications and sites. So these are the type of questions you will run across. And so I encourage you to sit down and think about how you respond to some of these, draft up some responses, practice with some friends. If you are in a job search that's happening very soon, make sure you're starting to think about these things so that you can be successful. I am going to actually close this. I'm in the business building, and I'm not sure if there's a class after me, and so I'm going to go ahead and close. But if you have questions, feel free to reach out to us at gradsupport@utep.edu. And again, thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much.